Hey everyone, it's Triggerman1976 again, and I just want to get another video out before the end of the year. So in this video, which will be part one of a two-part, we'll be looking at a video that was put out just a few months ago by a YouTuber by the name of Thomas Westbrook, also known as Holy Koolaid. Now in this video, like I said, it's part one of the two-part interaction. Isn't necessarily a full response to everything that he says. Rather, I just wanted to hit some of the high points in the video, which is titled 12 Contradictions in the Bible. Now I have a blog post that offers a fuller interaction over at the blog, and which is found at triggermanblog.wordpress.com. And as always, links will be in the description. Now this video that I'm going to be looking at here, I've got to thank Mr. Westbrook for producing a clear argument and for demonstrating at the beginning of his video that there's some things that get brought into these discussions that really aren't contradictions. So with that in mind, we first have to ask, what exactly is a contradiction? And a contradiction is usually defined as a combination of statements or ideas or features of a situation that are opposed to one another. And so I will, of course, have to admit that in reading the various biblical texts, because they are not a single text written by a single author, we can encounter what appear, or at least superficially appear, to be contradictions. Well, why might we encounter a contradiction in reading the biblical text? First of all, something that I don't know why it slips our minds. We're reading a translation of the text. So unless you're trained in the original languages, we're forced to interact with a translation. And while the translators do a very good job, they work so very hard, I thank God for them, that they can make the text understandable to non-readers. They are forced, oftentimes, by the nature of the language that they're translating into, to obscure cues that a native reader, the original audience, would have been able to pick up on. Another thing, depending on the translation that one is reading or the date that translation was published, a contradiction could be the result of a copyist error. Now, while the job of the translator is to produce a translation of the text from the original language source, sometimes they just render the text. They aren't interested in fixing anything in it. They just translate the text. And for example, we come to older translations like the King James Version. Just speaking of the original 1611, they didn't use original manuscripts as its textual basis. They used a number of, for lack of a better term, mass-produced printed text. That's not to say these were bad sources, but it was what they had to work with. So we have to keep that in mind. Now, the modern versions, like say the English Standard Version, which is one I prefer, reflects a greater emphasis on data derived from the original manuscript traditions to render the reading. And lastly, something that else we don't really get into is the fact that these texts were written according to the standards of ancient historiography. They weren't concerned with a great deal of precision, and sometimes they could be prone to exaggeration. Ancient writers just weren't necessarily concerned with these things. one of the things that they could do was round up to whole numbers, or use these impossibly huge numbers. And sometimes this is seen in instances where writers, and we can even see where writers will change the order of events or compress or expand elements because they have an intention in their narrative. They're telling us a story. We need to read it respectfully and try to understand it from their point of view. That's where we need to be starting at. Not ours, not as what modern Western readers. So, with that being said, I want to look at the first section of Holy Koolaid's video on two Old Testament passages.
2 Chronicles 36:9 says that the Old Testament Jewish king Jehoiakim was 8 years old when he began to reign as king, while 2 Kings 24:8 says that Jehoiakim was 18 years old when he began to reign. This seems minor, but it's a contradiction because it can't be both. Oh, and that's according to the King James Version for all you King James purists out there. If you're reading the NIV, the humans who wrote it ignored our oldest Hebrew manuscripts and edited out this discrepancy. And yes, if you look at the context, it's clearly talking about the same King Jehoiakim who became king when his father King Jehoiakim was ousted by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. So how do Christians try to explain away this discrepancy?
We don't have a lot of details about Jehoiakim. We have tons of details about a king named David. With David, he was anointed king in private when he was a teenager. Many years later, he was anointed king publicly, but only over a couple tribes. And then he was anointed king over all of Israel when he was still older. So the same may be the case with Jehoiakim, that Kings might be writing about the public inauguration of his kingship, and Chronicles, when it's a younger age, can be writing about a private ceremony.
No, this isn't that easy of a contradiction to explain away. In Chronicles, when Jehoiakim is just 8, his dad is hauled off in chains as a prisoner to Babylon, and he's put directly on the throne in his dad's place. This isn't a prophetic anointing, he's a Babylonian vassal. He rules for just 3 months before Nebuchadnezzar ousts him and he's replaced by his uncle Zedekiah. In other words, he's permanently removed from office before he even turned 10. In Kings, Jehoiakim doesn't become king until after his dad is killed, when he's 18. Just as in Chronicles, he rules for 3 months before Nebuchadnezzar ousts him and makes his uncle Zedekiah the next Babylonian vassal.
All right. So, what's going on in this text? Well, there's a couple things going on. And first things first, we need to address one of his last key claims. That humans who wrote the newer translations ignored the oldest Hebrew manuscripts and edited out this discrepancy. This is a reason why I discussed why we might run into what we would consider a contradiction in the biblical text. And it's very important because at this point, we seem to have encountered what is a copyist error, which we can see in this side-by-side comparison of the two texts, which I've thrown in English, the Hebrew, and the Septuagint here. So, when we compare these texts, the Hebrew here, which is from the base text for the King James, dates from about the 11th century AD. A word has fallen out of the text. However, as we can see, these are the words that are translated 18 and 10 or 8 respectively. However, look at the Greek text, we notice they have the same reading. Septuagint dates from plain middle of the 2nd century BC. And they have the same reading, octo kai deca, 18. So, what's really interesting here from a textual perspective is that we can almost identify the period of time which this reading fell out. So we have the Septuagint, which is 2nd century BC, has the reading in it. Jerome's Latin translation of the Old Testament has the corrupted reading at 2nd Chronicles. It's written 5th century, That means something in the 700 years between the Septuagint and the Vulgate, the word translated 10 or teen, Esra, fell out of the text of Second Chronicles. And looking at it, we can kind of figure out why, because it has some of the same letters of words around it, and it would be very easy to overlook it in copying it. So that means, contrary to Mr. Westbrook's claim that the oldest manuscripts weren't ignored, rather they were taken into consideration, and newer translations render the older, such as Septuagint, certain translations, certain like Syriac, have the correct reading in there, and they're reflected in the newer translations. So it's not edited out, it's fixed. So any contradiction here is simply resolved by the use of critical textual analysis. And that brings us to his second passage that we're going to look at.
Or here's another one. 1 Chronicles 19 and 2 Samuel 10 tell the exact same story of how Hanun, the king of the Amorites, disgraces the Jewish king David's messengers and sends Aramean mercenaries to battle against David's army, who massacre them. But 2 Samuel says that David killed 700 charioteers of the Arameans and 40,000 horsemen, while 1 Chronicles says that he killed 7,000 charioteers and 40,000 foot soldiers.
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
I couldn't have said any better, Struther. All right, so what's going on here? And of course, this is from his video. And so we need to figure out what's going on here with his highlights. First, the issue of the numbers. When we look at the text as it's presented, there's no real way to reconcile it. Clearly different words, both in the English and the original Hebrew, even the Septuagint, the Vulgate. It's consistent. So there's something else going on here. Well, that's where historiography comes in. What do I mean by that? All right, so this is, of course, a passage about a famous king. And like most texts or inscriptions that we find that date from this period, there is a tendency to inflate numbers to outsized proportions that seem to do one of two things. They either demonstrate the power of the enemy, or they demonstrate the importance of the victory. Victory is and these two work together. So with that in mind, when it comes to the issue of whether it's 700 or 7,000, we really can't sort it out. There's no way to reconcile the two. I'm fully agree to that. So the numbers really aren't an issue here, because it's ancient historiography. With that being said, what about the second issue that he brings up? Which is these two words right here that are translated horsemen and foot soldiers, respectively. What's going on there? Well, the word that's translated horsemen, or parashim, at 2 Samuel, and foot soldiers, ragli, at 1 Chronicles, are distinct words, both in Hebrew and English. And they seem extremely different. They seem like they're saying different things. However, in the original language, these appear semantically related. Or at least when you read scholars on these texts, that's how they see them. But I would like to produce a simpler suggestion, a simpler solution. And it's not something that we would normally think of. Rhyming. Well, what do we mean by that? Well, In 2 Samuel 10:18, of course, there's the word parashim. Well, it would rhyme with the word hamalakim in 2 Samuel 10:19. So the immediately verse following has a word that it would rhyme with. Similarly, when we go to 1 Chronicles 19, with the word ragli, it would rhyme with the conjunctive particle ki in 1 Chronicles 19:19. So this apparent rhyming would, why do I consider that just observing the text? Why would I consider that a reasonable solution to the problem, or at least part of a solution, part of a resolution? Well, because more than likely this was adapted from a song, and it would have been, and that song would have been preserved in the original language, and it would have this rhyming element. And we don't see it because we don't read or speak Hebrew. But this, okay, you're not liking that. Well, what about the apparent synonymous nature of this word? How would we demonstrate that? Well, the word ragli from 1 Chronicles 19:18 appears in 2 Samuel 10:6. Similarly, the word parashim, which is used in 2 Samuel 10:18, shows up in 1 Chronicles 19:6. So, either way, he's using it to rhyme. They're obviously synonymous because they get flipped, because they show up in the same text. Which, when we consider the facts of the original language, looking at this, either way, whether it's the numbers or the words, we can't say we really have a contradiction here. So, with that being said, I'm going to stop right here. But I'm going to ask you to stay tuned for part 2, where we will look at some alleged contradictions in the New Testament that he brings up. Once again, I am Triggerman 1976, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Oh, hey, it's Triggerman. If you like this video, be sure to smash that like button, share it with your friends, and please subscribe. Thank you very much.